When I confronted my husband's mistress, he retaliated by breaking 3 of my ribs. He locked me in the basement, telling me to reflect on my actions. I called my father, a powerful figure in the New York underworld, and told him not to let a single one of their family survive. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I would love to know which city you are all joining from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. I was in Las Vegas for a major presentation, a keynote speech for a tech design conference. My husband, Ethan, and I had started a company together, but in the Japanese last few years, I had stepped back to let him take the lead. I was the creative mind, and he was the businessman. Or so I believed. The presentation was a monumental success. I was riding a wave of exhilaration, and all I could think about was getting home to Ethan. We were supposed to celebrate our anniversary that weekend, but I simply could not wait. I remember the car ride from the airport. I called my assistant and told her to cancel my Friday meetings. I explained with a smile in my voice that I was going home. I felt giddy, like a teenager. I bought a bottle of Dom Perignon at the airport, picturing the look on his face. When the car pulled up to our sprawling home in Palo Alto, the house was dark, except for the upstairs bedroom light. It was late, just after 11. I paid the driver, told him to keep the change, and practically skipped to the door, fumbling with my keys. I called out that I was home, honey, as I pushed the door open. Silence. The first thing I noticed was the smell. A heavy, cloying perfume that was not mine. The second thing was the imported Italian marble floor in the foyer. It was cold under my feet, but what was on it made my blood run even colder. A pair of black lace stockings. A red silk bra. They were just dropped, a trail leading up the grand staircase. My heart did not just pound, it stopped. It just seized in my chest. I set the champagne bottle down very, very slowly. The click of my heels echoed in the cavernous silence as I walked to the bottom of the stairs. I whispered his name, Ethan. And then I heard it. A low moan from our bedroom. Our master bedroom. I kicked off my shoes. I think a small, foolish part of me was still trying to find an explanation. A movie? Was he watching a movie? But the moans got louder. And then, a laugh. A woman's laugh. It was sickly sweet, and it was familiar. She asked what he would do if his wife came back early. I froze. I knew that voice. Chloe Vance. My best friend from Stanford. The godmother to the child we never had. Ethan grunted, his breathing heavy with an excitement I had not heard in years. He told her not to worry. He said I was in Vegas and would not be back until tomorrow. He then added, so what if she did, calling me that broke designer. He said he was the one who paid for everything anyway. That broke designer. After I had poured my entire inheritance from my mother into his startup. After my designs had won all the awards that put his name on the map. I was a freeloader. I did not climb the rest of the stairs. I think I floated. My body was numb, but my mind was screaming. I did not knock. I kicked the door open. The sight burned into my retinas. The two of them, pale and tangled in my sheets. My bed. Ethan scrambled off her. He yelled my name, Amelia. Chloe just screamed, pulling the BraftaBraftably.com sheet over her chest, but there was a smirk on her face. A provocative, defiant smirk. Ethan started to say my name, grabbing for his boxers, telling me this was all a misunderstanding. I told him to shut up. My voice did not sound like my own. I walked straight past him, my eyes locked on Chloe. I whispered the word you. I swung my hand and slapped her across the face with all the strength I had. The sound cracked through the room. Her head snapped to the side. Ethan roared, asking if I was crazy. He leaped from the bed. I turned to face him, and that is when he did it. He did not punch me. He kicked me. A full force, powerful kick to my side. He was wearing his heavy work boots. I heard it. A crack. It was not loud, but it was sickening. The air just vanished. It was sucked out of my lungs. I could not breathe in. I could not breathe out. I just folded, clutching my side, and collapsed onto the floor, gasping like a fish. The pain was immediate, a white-hot, blinding fire that shot through my whole entire torso. I tried to inhale, and it felt like a dozen knives were stabbing me from the inside. He sneered at me to stop the drama and get up as he pulled on his pants. I could not. I was trying to tell him I could not breathe, but no sound came out. Chloe said his name. Her voice now laced with a tiny bit of panic, telling him she thought he had really hurt me. He spat that I deserved it, asking how dare I hit her, reminding me that her father was the CEO of Vance Global. He looked down at me, his face a mask of contempt, and called me a pathetic nothing. The next few minutes were a blur of agonizing pain. Every time I tried to move, or even breathe, the broken ends of my ribs felt like they were grinding together. Ethan did not call an ambulance. He grabbed me by the arm, the one on the side that was not on fire, and hauled me to my feet. I screamed, a strangled, breathy sound that only made the pain worse. He yelled at me to shut up, his face inches from mine. He said I was going to reflect on what I did. He and Chloe, she was wrapped in my silk robe, I remember that, dragged me out of the bedroom. I was dizzy, my vision spotting with black. They did not take me downstairs to the guest room. They hauled me through the kitchen and to the kitchen heavy oak door that led to the basement. Our basement was not finished. It was a cold, damp, concrete cellar where we stored old furniture and Christmas decorations. It smelled like mildew and earth. He opened the door and shoved me. I stumbled, lost my balance, and tumbled down the first few steps, landing in a heap on the cold concrete floor. The impact sent a shockwave of agony through my body so intense that I almost passed out. I just lay there, sobbing and fighting for every single, shallow breath. I heard Ethan tell our housekeeper, who was standing at the top of the stairs with the top of the stairs look of pure terror, not to give me anything to eat. He said I needed to stay down there for 24 hours and think about my place in this house. The heavy, steel-lined door slammed shut, and the deadbolt clicked into place. Darkness. It was absolute. I was alone in the dark with 3 broken ribs and a second broken life. I do not know how long I lay there. Time just dissolved. My world shrank to the size of the next breath. Inhale, pain. Exhale, pain. I was so cold. I managed to crawl to a corner, pulling an old, dusty tarp over me. I huddled there, shivering, my teeth chattering. Each shiver sent a fresh jolt to my ribs. I started to wonder if I was going to die down there. If he would come down in the morning and find me, a cold, broken-ribbed freeloader. I must have drifted in and out of consciousness. I felt for the phone in my jacket pocket. It was still there. Miraculously, the screen was not cracked. My fingers were so numb and stiff I could barely unlock it. The dim light of the screen was blinding. I was weak, dizzy, and I knew I did not have much time. I scrolled through my contacts. Who could I call? The police? What would I say? That my husband locked me in the basement? They would call it a domestic dispute. My thumb stopped at the very bottom of the list. A single word. Dad. A number. I had not called in 20 years. Not since my mother's funeral. My father, Michael. He is a complicated man. My mother had run away from him and that life. When I was a child. She wanted me to be normal, to be safe. After she died, I chose her path. I went to college, got a design degree, and cut all ties with Kafis. The family business. I never even told my father I was getting married. And what did all that noble pride get me? My finger hovered over the call button. I was his daughter. The daughter who had turned her back on him. What if he hung up? I did not have the strength to call back. I pressed the button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up. A gravelly, authoritative voice I had not heard in 2 decades answered with a gruff, hello. I managed a raw, broken whisper, asking if it was Dad, telling him. It was me, Amelia. Silence. For a long, terrifying 5 seconds, there was just silence. I thought he had hung up. I cried out his name, a broken sob escaping, which made me gasp in pain. Then, I heard a sound on the other end. A chair, crashing to the floor. His voice was suddenly urgent, sharp, as he said my name. He demanded to know where I was, what happened, and who had hurt me. I choked out that my husband had broken my ribs, that he had locked me in the basement. I told him I was so cold and pleaded for his help. His voice turned to ice as he told me to send my address right now, promising he would be there in 10 minutes. Before the line went dead, I heard him yelling orders to get the car and a man named Sal. With trembling hands, I sent my location. And then, I started to laugh. A hysterical, painful laugh that sent daggers into my chest. Ethan, that fool. He thought I was just some ordinary designer. He had no idea who my father was. Less than 10 minutes. He was not lying. I was still huddled under the tarp, my day 5. Phone clutched in my hand when I heard the sounds. Not a siren. Nothing so public. I heard frantic footsteps upstairs. I heard shouting. A man's voice, not Ethan's, yelling the word clear. Then, a sound like a battering ram hitting a door. And then, the basement door did not just open. It exploded off its hinges, crashing against the far wall. The blinding light from the kitchen flooded staircase, silhouetting 3 huge men in black suits. A voice called out my name. A burly man with a shaved head and a broken nose rushed down the stairs, his eyes scanning the darkness. He knelt beside me, his face a mixture of professional calm and barely concealed rage. He introduced himself as Sal and explained that the Don had sent him to get me. He gently moved the tarp. His eyes went to my side, where I was clutching myself. His face hardened. He muttered a curse about the bastards who did this. He looked at the bastards' stairs and said they needed a board, that he could not carry me because of my ribs. He barked orders into a small microphone on his cuff. As he was working, I saw 2 of Ethan's security guards, the ones he hired to look tough, lying unconscious at the top of the stairs. Upstairs, I could hear Chloe screaming. Not a scream of pleasure. A scream of pure terror. I heard Ethan yelling, his voice cracking, that this was private property and they could not be here. Sal and another man carefully slid a flat piece of wood, it looked like a shelf, under me. Gritting my teeth against the deities, fire in my chest, I let them lift me. As they carried me up the stairs, like a medieval queen on a plank, I saw the scene in my kitchen. Ethan and Chloe were on their knees, held down by 2 other men in suits. Chloe was still in my robe, her face pale and blotchy with tears. Ethan was in his boxers and a turry, half-buttoned shirt, trembling, his eyes wide with terror. He screamed my name, asking who these people were and what I was doing, struggling against the man holding him. I leaned weakly against Sal's shoulder as he helped me into a waiting wheelchair. I gave Ethan a blood-stained smile. I whispered, my voice hoarse, that I would introduce him. I told him this was Sal, my father's right-hand man, and as for who my father was, he would find out soon enough. Chloe shrieked that it was impossible, that I had said my father was dead. Sal wheeled me out the front door, past the trail of her clothes, which were now kicked into a dirty pile. A black, armored limousine was idling in my driveway. The door opened, and for the first time in 20 years, I came face to face with my father. Michael. He looked older. His hair was more salt and pepper, but his eyes, his hawk-like eyes, were just as sharp as I remembered. Those eyes were now fixed on me, on my pale face, on the way I could not sit up straight. He started to speak, using my mother's pet name for me, Sophia. His voice trembled, just slightly. He reached out a hand, then stopped, afraid to touch me. He ordered Sal to get me to the medical center, telling him to have Dr. Evans prep an operating room, now. I was gently lifted into the plush leather seats. As the door closed, I heard my father's voice, as cold as ice, directed at Sal. He told him to leave 2 men to leave 2 men. Secure the house, not to let them leave or touch a phone, and that he would deal with them when he got back. Then, he got in the car with me. He pressed a Franus Tancher button, and a soundproof partition slid up. It was just us. He asked, his voice quiet, who did this? I said it was my husband, Ethan, a bitter laugh, escaping, which made me wince. I told him I caught him cheating with my friend, Chloe Vance. My father's eyes narrowed at the name Vance. He asked if she was Jonathan Vance's daughter. I confirmed she was. He stared at me, then a chilling, murderous glint I remembered from my childhood entered his eyes. He stated that Ethan would have his legs broken, and as for the Vances, no. One from that family was to be left standing. We did not go to a normal hospital. The limousine pulled into a private, underground entrance of a discreet medical center, the kind that does not ask for insurance cards. A team was waiting. Dr. Evans, one of the top orthopedic surgeons in the country, was there personally. He looked at the x-rays and gently told me I had 3 fractured ribs on the right side, numbers 7, 8, and 9. He explained that 8 was a clean break, and 7 and 9 were hairline but painful, and that I was very lucky one had not punctured a lung. He looked at my father and said I would be off my feet for at least 6 weeks, with no strenuous activity, and that breathing was going to hurt. My father's only response was to tell him to fix me. I woke up in a suite that looked more like a 5-star hotel room. My father was sitting on the sofa, a phone to his ear. He was saying he did not care about the cable market, that it should be liquidated, all of it. He saw me stir and immediately hung up. He asked, his voice rough, how I was feeling. I whispered that I felt like I got kicked by a mule. My side was heavily taped, and a dull ache throbbed. Thanks to the painkillers. My father said, his jaw tightening, that Ethan would pay. He said Sal was waiting for his order, and that Ethan would be at the bottom of the San Francisco Bay by morning. I said no, louder than I expected, which made me wince. No, Dad. He looked at me, confused. I explained that Ethan had done this to me, that he had dishonored me, and that death was too easy. I told him, my voice as cold as ice, that Ethan had called me a broke designer, a freeloader, nothing. If you kill him, I said, I am just a widow with a divorce settlement. I told him I wanted Ethan to suffer. I took a breath, the pain reminding me of my calted purpose. I wanted him to watch everything he built, everything I built, turn to ash. I wanted him to lose his company, his reputation, his money, his freedom. I wanted him to be the one who was broke. And when he had absolutely nothing left, then Sal could take him. A slow, satisfied smile touched my father's lips. He said that was his daughter. He pulled a thick file from his briefcase. He said it was perfect timing, that his people had just found this. He explained that Ethan's company was betting everything on the new Presidio Point redevelopment project, and that their bid was full of inflated numbers. More interestingly, my husband had embezzled $3 million of company funds to launder at a casino in Atlantic City, and he still had not filled that hole. I took the file. My heart started to race. This evidence alone was enough to send Ethan to prison, enough to make his company's stock plummet. I told my dad I needed time. I was going to pretend to forgive him. I would go back to that house and gather more. I needed to destroy him with my own hands. He frowned, saying it was too dangerous. I insisted, telling him Ethan thought I was weak, a pathetic nothing, and that he would never see me coming. After a long silence, he finally nodded. He agreed, but said Sal would stay by my side, 24/7. He then made another call. He said he needed someone named Benjamin, for his daughter's suite, right now. A few minutes later, a man I had never seen before entered. He was in his late 30s, sharp in a perfectly tailored suit with tailored, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. My father introduced him as Benjamin Carter, and me as his daughter, Amelia. He explained that Benjamin handled all NTHE, their legitimate investments, and was a prodigy, and that he was mine now, to do whatever I asked. Benjamin looked at me, then at the file. He said he had heard a great deal about me, Miss Costello. His voice was calm and steady. He said he had been tracking Ethan Pierce's company for a while, that their books were a 70-20-70 mess, and it would be his pleasure to help me clean them up. A few days later, a terrified-looking Ethan appeared at my hospital room door. His suit was wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He was holding a pathetic bouquet of carnations. He said my name, his voice trembling. He claimed he had no idea about my father, Don Michael. I composed my face into a look of weary forgiveness, which I had been practicing in the mirror. I said softly, wincing as I shifted, that it was my fault, too. I should not have hit Chloe. That was just such a shock. He rushed to my bedside as if I had thrown him a lifeline. He asked if this meant I forgave him, swearing he must have been out of his mind and that it was All Chloe's fault, that she had seduced him and it would never happen again. His clumsy acting made me want to throw up the soup I had had for breakfast. But the play had to go on. I said he had already gotten an earful from my father, had he? Not? He visibly flinched. He admitted my father had been very clear about his responsibilities. I reached out a weak hand and told him to let us just put this behind us, that when I got out of here, we could start over. Ethan nodded. Frantically, unable to hide his relief. He had no idea that as he held my hand, with his phony sincerity, a hidden camera in the room was recording his every expression. On the day of my discharge, my father sent a motorcade of 10 black Mercedes to escort me back to the Palo Alto mansion. The spectacle was so over the top it made the local news. Ethan stood at the front door, his face pale as he watched Sal himself push my wheelchair inside. Sal whispered in Ethan's ear, just loud enough for me to hear, that if even a single scratch appeared on Miss Amelia, the Don said he wanted to watch him get eaten alive by wild dogs. Ethan's legs trembled. He looked like he was about to wet himself. Returning to the place I once called home felt disgusting. The bed in our bedroom was especially repulsive. Ethan had changed the sheets, but I could vividly picture him and Chloe writhing on it. I told him I would sleep in the Talanjas guest room, that my ribs needed to be propped up. He agreed to anything, of course. Later that evening, I told him he should rest. He said he had an urgent matter at the office, pouring me a glass of water before trying to make a quick exit. I smiled and told him to come home early, watching him leave. The moment he was gone, I poured the water into a potted plant. Sal stood guard outside my door while I opened my laptop. As Ethan's wife and co-founder, I knew the passwords to all his devices. I logged into his cloud account and quickly found what I was looking for. Hotel booking records for the subsopple last 6 months. Bank transfer histories. And even a few videos that were hard to watch. I muttered that he was an animal, with a cold smile, saving all the frayed evidence to a secure drive Benjamin had given me. Just then, a new message popped up on his screen. It was from Chloe. She wrote, "Thank God I believed him. And that she would wait for him at their usual spot, that she missed him like crazy, baby." I stared at the screen, then laughed out loud. The laugh sent a sharp pain through my ribs, but I did not care. Ethan could not even wait 3 days. Perfect. This would make my revenge all the more satisfying. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. I played the part of the Talano, fragile, forgiving wife. I would sit in the garden, a blanket over my lap, sketching in my old notepad. Ethan would come home, kiss me on the forehead, and ask how I was feeling. I would say a little better every day, darling. His parents, Richard and his wife, came over for dinner. It was a production. My mother-in-law, who had always treated me like hired help, was now fussing over me, cutting my food, fluffing my pillows. She gushed about how sorry they were for the misunderstanding, saying boys will be boys, and that they were just so glad I was part of the family. I sipped my soup and agreed that family was the most important thing. Richard, Ethan's father, was a little more transparent. He was nervous. He cleared his throat and mentioned that he had heard my father, Don Michael, had been buying up some bonds in the city, making big moves. I smiled sweetly, and said I would not know about that we did not talk business, that we had just reconnected after all these years. He dabbed his forehead with a napkin and agreed. They were all terrified. Not of me, but of my father. They thought I was a broken bird with a powerful protector. They had no idea the broken bird was learning to fly and hunt. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his clumsy dance. He was subservient to me in public, but my private investigator, a gift from my father, was sending me daily reports. Ethan and Chloe were still meeting. Not at fancy hotels, but at a cheap motel on the edge of town. They were getting sloppy. They were getting desperate. I spent my days recovering. I would have Sal drive me to physical therapy, which was really a meeting with Benjamin in a secure office downtown. Benjamin pointed to a chart and said Ethan was bleeding money. He was trying to bless and cover the $3 million hole, but he was doing it by taking out high-interest unsecured loans. He was desperate to make the Presidio Point project work. I said that was good, and asked how our end was. Benjamin smiled. and said they had quietly acquired 3% of Pierce Development stock through a shell corporation, and that he had been in contact with 2 minority shareholders who were very unhappy with Ethan's leadership and willing to sell. My phone vibrated. It was a message from my father. The anniversary party for Pierce Development was in 1 week. I was to be there, to be the perfect wife, and then, I was to burn them to the ground. I looked at Benjamin and said it was time to prepare for the party. I told him I needed him to find me a financial prodigy from Wall Street, someone handsome, someone who would make Ethan jealous. I wanted him to attend the party as my guest. Benjamin adjusted his glasses. He said with a small smile playing on his lips that he thought he knew just the man himself. This was getting better and better. I spent the next week preparing. I picked out a dress, a deep crimson, blood red, with a slit that showed off my leg. My ribs were still healing, so I could not wear a corset, but the pain was manageable now. It was a good reminder. The night of the party, Ethan came into the guest room as I was getting ready. He said, "Wow, that I looked stunning." I said it was an important night, the 25th anniversary, and that I could not have him losing face. He breathed a visible sigh of relief. The foolish man. He really thought I was back. The party was held at the Ritz-Carlton. The ballroom was dripping with crystals and champagne. The moment I entered on Ethan's arm, hundreds of eyes turned to raid us. They were filled with curiosity, surprise, and mostly the eager anticipation of a public spectacle. The scandal of a tycoon's wife being locked in a basement had been the whisper of the elite for weeks, but my forgiveness had confused them. Ethan whispered in my ear that I looked stunning tonight. His hot breath on my neck made my stomach churn. I suppressed my disgust and gave him a radiant smile. My father-in-law, Richard, and his wife approached, their faces plastered with awkward smiles. Richard wrung his hands and asked how my ribs were, saying they were so grateful for my understanding. I responded with a smile and scanned the Reba Kanda Ananda room. I soon spotted Chloe by the champagne tower. She was wearing a white lace dress, making her look like a cheap wedding cake. She shot me a look full of resentment. She had not been invited, but as the daughter of Jonathan Vance, a major partner, she was here. I told Ethan I needed to go say hello to an old friend, releasing his arm. I walked over to Chloe. I said her name, that it had been a while, my voice just loud enough for people nearby to hear. She sneered my name, Amelia, and told me not to be so smug, that Ethan was only with me because he was afraid of my father. I silenced her by placing my index finger on her lips. I told her not to spoil the mood, that there was going to be a fun little show later, and to make sure she kept her composure. Before she could react, I turned away and came face to face with Benjamin. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his eyes sharp. He kissed the back of my hand and said my father spoke very highly of his daughter. I smiled and said I was hoping we could speak after. As the party got into full swing, Richard Pierce took the stage to boast about the glorious achievements of Pierce Development, conveniently omitting any mention of a $3 million hole in their finances. He announced that he finally wanted to thank his daughter-in-law, Amelia, for her understanding and grace. He said what was important was that the family remained strong and asked everyone to raise a glass to the lovely couple. Everyone raised their glasses. I lowered my head to hide the contempt in my eyes, then looked up with a warm smile. Ethan, seemingly moved, took my hand. He said he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me. I said softly that he would not need a lifetime, that he could start right now. Leaving him with a puzzled look, I walked up to the stage, taking the microphone from the MC. I thanked everyone for attending. My voice was clear and steady. I announced that as the wife in this family, I had prepared a special anniversary gift. I gestured towards the lighting booth. The ballroom lights dimmed, and a massive screen slowly descended from the ceiling. Ethan's face tensed. He tried to rush the stage, pleading for me not to, but Sal appeared behind him, his hand clamping down on Ethan's shoulder like a vice. I said to enjoy the show, darling, and pressed a button on the remote. The high-definition screen lit up. A crystal-clear video of Ethan and Chloe writhing on my marital bed, complete with graphic audio. A date stamp in the bottom right corner showed it was filmed just 2 days after I returned from the Hospital. The ballroom erupted. Chloe screamed and ran for the exit, but was blocked by security. My father-in-law's face turned ashen. I announced that was just the beginning, switching the screen. Bank statements. Casino surveillance footage. I explained that my husband embezzled $3 million of company money to gamble in Atlantic City. And finally, I played an audio recording of Ethan on the phone with a demolition crew, saying he did not care if one or two of them died, that the important thing was that the site was cleared by tomorrow. The ballroom fell dead silent. I walked step by step towards the ashen-faced Ethan. My voice was quiet, but sharp. I reminded him that for 3 years, my designs won awards that raised his stock price 30%. And in return, he gave me betrayal, violence, and 3 broken ribs. Ethan's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees. He said he was so sorry, that he was wrong. I suddenly raised my voice, turning to the stunned guests and declaring that I forgave him, because I was just that loving of a wife. The room buzzed with confusion. My father-in-law, Richard, as if granted a pardon, scrambled onto the stage and snatched the microphone. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, that as they could see, his daughter-in-law had forgiven his son, and he asked everyone to please enjoy the party. He was trying to do damage control, but the damage was done. The investors were already clustered in a corner, their faces grim. The reporters were frantically typing on their phones. I descended from the stage, walking through a sea of complicated stairs toward the corner, where Benjamin was waiting. He handed me a glass of champagne, his eyes shining with admiration. He called it a magnificent performance. I said it was just the beginning, taking a sip. The next morning, the financial world exploded. The video had been leaked by Benjamin to every major news outlet. The hashtag number Pierce scandal was trending. By the time the market opened at 9:30, Pierce Development stock was in a free fall. I was in Benjamin's high-tech office, which he had set up in a discreet downtown building. We had 3 monitors open. One showed the stock ticker, one showed the news, and one showed a secure feed of our own accounts. Benjamin said calmly that the board was requesting a trading halt, but it was too late, that the short sellers were having a field day. I sipped my coffee and said good, asking when our plan went into effect. He said now. As the price hit rock bottom, our offshore corporation, the one I was the sole beneficiary of, would begin to buy. He explained we were not just short selling, we were executing a hostile takeover. My phone rang. It was Ethan. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. My father-in-law. I ignored it. The rest of the week was a blur of beautiful, calculated chaos. I retreated from the public eye, playing the part of the humiliated wife. I let Ethan leave desperate, pleading voicemails. He begged me to talk to my father, saying he was the only one who could stop this. He cried that they were losing everything, the banks were calling in his loans, the board was trying to oust him. He pleaded that he would do anything. I sat in my hotel suite, having left the mansion, of course, and listened to his messages, a small smile on my face. Benjamin came by that evening with a bottle of wine. He said we had hit our first target, pouring me a glass. He informed me we now owned 5% of Pierce Development. The 2 minority shareholders, impressed at the party, had sold their combined 8% to us that afternoon. I was now, secretly, the 3rd largest shareholder. I took the glass and said it was not enough, that I wanted it all. He told me to have patience, that we were just getting started. The board had called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. They had invited him as a representative of the new concerned investors. I laughed that they had invited the fox into the henhouse. He said exactly. And he was going to suggest a full, independent audit of all company finances, especially the Presidio Point project. And he was going to nominate a new interim COO to oversee it, someone with a fresh perspective. I asked who. He smiled and said himself. This was better than I could have imagined. Ethan was not just losing his company. He was being replaced by the very man who was helping me tear him down. While Benjamin was handling the corporate demolition, I was handling the beaches. Personal. Something about Chloe still bothered me. She had disappeared after the shower party, and her father, Jonathan Vance, had issued a statement condemning Ethan and supporting his poor, victimized daughter. It was all PR nonsense. But my gut told me there was more. I was still recovering from my ribs. The ache was a constant, dull throb, a reminder. I had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Evans. As I was leaving the discreet medical center, I saw a familiar figure, trying to slip out a side door. It was Chloe. She was wearing a hat, sunglasses, and she looked pale. But what caught my eye was the clinic she was exiting. Obstetrics and gynecology. I quickly ducked around a corner. I called my private investigator. I told him Chloe Vance was just at the Chapman Clinic, OBGYN, and I wanted to know everything. An hour later, I had the answer. Chloe was pregnant. About 8 weeks along. I did the math in my head. 8 weeks. The party was just last week. That meant I pulled out my phone and checked the files I had stolen. From Ethan's computer. The hotel receipts. The bank transfers. And his travel itinerary. My blood ran cold, then hot. 8 weeks ago, Ethan Pierce was in Eversevend, Singapore and Hong Kong on a business trip. A 6-week-long trip. He had not been in the country at the time of conception. The baby was not Ethan's. I laughed. This was a soap opera. So, who was the father? I called my PI back. I told him I needed him to look into Chloe's finances, specifically any large, unusual payments. The next day, I got another report. Chloe had been receiving monthly payments. $100,000 every month for the last 3 years. Not from Ethan. From a shell company. A shell company that my father's team traced back in under an hour. It belonged to my father-in-law, Richard Pierce. I had to sit down. My head was spinning. Richard. The old, sanctimonious patriarch. He was not just paying Chloe to be his son's mistress. He was what? Paying her to keep quiet? And then, another, darker thought clicked into place. The dates. The PI had pulled Chloe's visitor logs from her apartment. Richard Pierce had been a very frequent visitor. Especially when Ethan was out of town. Oh my God. I called Benjamin. I told him I needed him to do something for me, my voice shaking with a new kind of rage. I needed him to get a DNA sample from Richard. A cup he used, a napkin, I did not care. And I needed him to run a test against Chloe. He asked what was going on. I told him just to do it, that I thought I had just found the key to destroying them all, for good. Chloe was not just Ethan's mistress. She was his father's mistress, too. And she was pregnant with his father's child. This family was not just corrupt. It was rotten to the core. This changed everything. My revenge plan had just been upgraded from demolition to a nuclear strike. The opportunity presented itself a week later. A major charity auction at the Cruster Pacific Union Club. One of those high society, see, and be seen events. I knew Chloe's family, the Vances, were major patrons. I also knew that Chloe, desperate to save her reputation, would be there, playing the part of the wronged woman. I bought a table, front and center. I wore a dress of pure white silk. Angelic. Innocent. Sal, as always, was my shadow, disguised as a chauffeur. Chloe was there, just as I had predicted. She was holding court in a corner, dabbing at her eyes, telling a circle of society women how Ethan had tricked her. She was wearing a tight-fitting black dress, not even trying to hide the slight swell of her stomach. She was weaponizing her pregnancy. I waited until the live auction began. Then, I walked over. I said her name, my voice carrying in the relative quiet. The group went silent. I told her she looked glowing, that pregnancy suited her. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. She hissed, asking how I dared. I smiled and said I dared. I told her I was just a little confused. I had been looking at Ethan's calendar. He was in Asia for all of May and June. And she was what, 8, maybe 9 weeks along? The math was just so tricky. The women around us gasped. Their eyes darted from me to Chloe's stomach. She shrieked that I was lying, that Ethan was here, that he came back for a weekend. I feigned confusion, saying that was not what his passport said. But you know who was in town? His father, Richard. He visited your apartment, let's see, 6 times that month. He must have been comforting you while his son was away. Chloe's face crumpled. She knew. She knew I had her. The circle of women melted. away, not wanting to be associated with this. She sobbed that I was a monster. I leaned in and said no, that I was just a woman who was very, very good at math. I turned to walk away. And then, she did something stupid. She lunged at me, her hands raised like claws, screaming she would kill me. I did not even flinch. Sel, who had been standing by the door, moved in a blur. He did not touch her. He just stepped in front of me. Chloe, blinded by rage, tried to swerve. Her high heel caught on the edge of the plush rug. She stumbled, arms flailing, and fell. Hard. She fell spectacularly, right at the foot of the stage, in front of everyone. She screamed. A horrible, gut-wrenching scream. And as she scrambled to her feet, a dark red stain was spreading across the back of her white dress. She shrieked about her baby, clutching her stomach. The ballroom descended into chaos. People were shouting. I just stood there, watching, my face a perfect mask of shock and concern. I calmly pulled out my phone. I dialed 911. I said, my voice trembling, that there had been a terrible accident, a pregnant woman had fallen, and to please hurry. Then I made a second call to Ethan. I told him thank God, that it was Chloe, that she fell, and there was blood everywhere. He needed to come, she was losing the baby. His first reaction, before he could think, was damn it, now his father was going to kill him. Click. I hung up. I watched them wheel Chloe out on a stretcher. Not only had she humiliated herself in public, but she had also lost the one thing she thought would save her. The gossip columnists would have a field day. And I had his confession on tape. That his father was going to kill him. I went back to the hospital. Not for my ribs, but for my father. He had been quiet. Too quiet. I found him in his study, surrounded by the scent of cigars and old leather. I told him the Chloe Vance situation was done. He nodded, not looking up from a faded photograph he was holding. He said he knew that it was messy. I sat opposite him and asked him a question. When I had mentioned Chloe Vance's name back in the car, he had reacted. He knew her father, Jonathan. I asked why. Michael sighed. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were old. So old. He said. He never wanted me to be a part of this, that my mother wanted me to have a normal life. I told him my normal life got me 3 broken ribs and a cheating husband, and that he needed to tell me. He pushed the yellowed envelope across the shoulders. The desk. The same one from my mother's things. But this time, he took out a different photo. It was a picture of my mother, beautiful and smiling, standing next to a younger Richard Pierce. And a younger, Jonathan Vance. I whispered, asking what it was. My father said, his voice flat, that 25 years ago, my mother was not just a designer. She was an activist. She was fighting a new development project. The company was cutting corners, using non-code materials, and the site was polluting the local water. I asked what this had to do with anything. He said the company was Pierce Development, a joint venture with Vance Global. My mother, she got proof. Not just of the pollution, but of something worse. A protester had died at the site, beaten to death by company security. My mother had a video. She was going to go to the SAF. My mother had a video. Police. I dug my nails into my palms and asked what happened. He explained that Richard and Jonathan found out. They went to see her. They offered her money, a divorce settlement for him, anything. She refused. The next day, the police ruled her death an accidental fall. He said he knew it was not. That he had been collecting evidence for 20 years, but their roots in politics and business ran too deep. He could never make it stick. I stared at the photo, my vision blurring. The truth I had been told, it was all a horrific lie. My mother, murdered by my father-in-law and the father of my husband's mistress. I asked about the security guard who did the beating, my voice a raw whisper. My father sneered that he was dead, died in a car accident 3 days after my mother's funeral. A horrible realization dawned on me. I said he was waiting for this, for me to find out. He sighed that he did not want me to be blinded by his revenge. But now I had my own reasons. I stood up and walked to the window. The gentle, kind mother, who had taught me to paint, who sang me to sleep, had met such a talon's brutal end. I turned back, my voice strangely calm, and told my dad that they had to pay the price, in blood. Not just Ethan. The entire Pierce and Vance families. I wanted an inheritance of blood. A look of dark satisfaction crossed my father's eyes. He asked if I had a plan. I said, oh, yes. Richard Pierce's 60th birthday party was next week. And I was going to give him a present he would never, ever forget. Richard Pierce's 60th birthday party was the pinnacle of denial. Despite the pinnacle of denial, public scandal, the stock crash, and the unfortunate incident with Chloe, Richard was determined to project an image of power and stability. The mansion was lavishly decorated, a string quartet playing. I arrived with Ethan. He was a broken man. His father had forced him to come, to put on a united front. He was pale, shaking, and would not look me in the eye. He was just a puppet, and I was done with him. My sights were set on the puppet master. I wore a black dress. Simple, elegant, funereal. At my throat was a simple pearl necklace. My mother's. Richard boomed a greeting, my dear, you came, his eyes lingering for a moment on the pearls as his face subtly tensed. I said with a sweet smile that I would not miss it, father, and that I was so glad he remembered them. Richard forced a composed expression and led us to the head table. The party reached its peak, and the MC announced the toasts. Richard took the stage, boasting about his Terry Dash legacy, never once mentioning the scandals. And finally, he said, raising his glass, that he wanted to thank his wonderful daughter-in-law, Amelia, for her grace and understanding, because family is everything. As applause broke out, I gracefully stood up and walked toward the stage. Under the table, Ethan desperately tugged at my dress, but I easily sidestepped him. I took the microphone and said he was too kind, that as the daughter-in-law of this family, I had also prepared a special birthday present for him. I gave Benjamin, who was standing by the tech booth, a nod. The large screen in the Swatians ballroom descended. Richard's face tightened, a sense of foreboding in his eyes. First, I said, let us take a look at the actual blueprints for the Presidio Point project. I pressed the remote. The real plans, showing cheap, non-code materials and fake safety reports, flashed on the screen. Several city officials in the crowd paled. The director of city planning shouted, asking Mr. Pierce what the meaning of this was. Richard rushed the stage, saying it was a misunderstanding. But I quickly moved to the next slide. I announced that next, we had the transaction history of Mr. Richard Pierce's Swiss bank account. For the past 3 years, he had transferred over $100,000 a month to Miss Chloe Vance. The ballroom fell dead silent. Chloe, who was sitting in a dark corner, let out a small scream. And finally, my voice suddenly turned sharp. I presented Miss Chloe Vance's pregnancy diagnosis. I explained that if you calculated the date of conception, my husband, Ethan, was on a business trip in Asia. Ethan shot up from his seat, shouting that it was a lie. I calmly said that I also had the DNA test results. Right here, displaying the final slide. The lab report was clear. Paternity confirmed. Father, Richard Pierce. I turned to my husband and said, darling, the results say the child, the one Chloe just lost? It was your father's son. Your brother. The ballroom exploded. Ethan looked at the screen, at his father, and back at the screen. He let out a primal roar, like an animal, and lunged, not at me, but at his father. He tackled Richard, sending them both crashing into the birthday cake. He screamed, asking if he slept with her, punching his father in the face. The situation devolved into complete chaos. Board members were leaving. Bankers were tearing up loan agreements. Reporters were snapping photos furiously. I descended from the stage, walking calmly through the sea of shocked stares. Behind me, I could hear Ethan's roars and Richard's sobs. It was a beautiful, beautiful sound. My friends, as you can imagine, at that moment, standing there watching that entire rotten family implode, it was a long way from the cold, dark basement. If you are still listening to my story, if you have been here with me through all of this, please help me by liking this video and commenting with the number 1 down below. It just lets me know that you are out there, and that you are wonderful for hearing me out. It lets me know you have been on this journey with me. Your support is an incredible encouragement. Please, just comment with the Number 1, so I can see you. And now, you need to hear what happened next. Because it was not over. Not by a long shot. As I walked out of that ballroom, the sounds of chaos fading behind me, Sal was at my side in an instant. He said the car was ready. I told him good, that I wanted to go to the hospital to see something for myself. I wanted to see. Richard Pierce wheeled into the emergency room. We were halfway there, driving through the dark, quiet streets, when Sal suddenly tensed. He said, his eyes on the rearview mirror, that we were being followed. I looked back. A black, unmarked SUV, its headlights off, was closing in fast. I asked if it was Ethan. Sal said no, his knuckles white on the wheel, that Ethan was still at the party, crying over the cake. This was someone else. The SUV pulled up alongside us. And then, it swerved, slamming into our car. I was thrown forward, my seatbelt locking painfully. The impact, even in our armored car, sent a jolt of pain through my healed ribs, a phantom echo of Ethan's kick. Sal yelled for me to get down. He wrenched the wheel, but the SUV hit us again, trying to push us off the road and into the guardrail. In that instant, 2 motorcycles roared onto the scene, seemingly from nowhere. Their riders, dressed in black, fired at the SUV's tires. The SUV lost control, flipped several times, and crashed into a concrete divider, exploding in a fireball. Sal said, his breathing not even heavy, that they were from the dawn. He smoothly corrected the car and continued driving as if nothing had happened. He asked if I was all right. I touched the growing lump on my forehead where I had hit the stacker window. I gave a cold smile. Ethan must be truly desperate. Or Chloe. Or maybe Jonathan. Sal said it did not matter, that they were amateurs and they were finished. Back at the safe house, a discreet penthouse my father kept in Tribeca, I called him. I told him they had sent people after me. His voice was grim as he said he knew, and that he had handled it. He said it was time to end this, that Jonathan Vance was the one who gave the order. He was desperate, his company collapsing. After my presentation, I walked to the window and said it was not enough, that I needed to see them all pay. My father agreed. It was time. The next night, a silver van pulled up outside the cheap motel where Chloe was hiding. My men, Saul's men, were professional. They took her and they took Ethan, who was now a person of interest in his own father's assault case. They were brought to an abandoned warehouse at the docks. I was already there, sitting in the shadows, a single spotlight on 2 empty chairs. When they pulled the hood off Ethan's head, he shrieked, asking what this was. Who they were. Sal told him to shut up. They threw Chloe into the other chair. She was a wreck. Her face was bruised, her hair matted. I stepped into the light and said his name. His eyes widened in terror. He cried my name, Amelia, thank God. He begged me to help him, that these people kidnapped him. I told the idiot that they worked for me. Chloe screamed at me that I had ruined everything, that the baby was her golden ticket. I asked if that was what she called her father-in-law's child, her brother-in-law. Ethan whimpered my name, pleading that he was wrong, so wrong. He claimed it was all Chloe, that she planned it, that she pushed him to do it. He called her the evil one. And his father. He said it was his father who got her pregnant. He claimed to be a victim, too. I walked circles around him, asking if a victim was someone who broke his wife's ribs, who embezzled $3 million, who hired a man to run his wife off the road tonight. He denied it, saying that was not him, that it was Jonathan Vance, Chloe's father. He said Jonathan claimed it would solve all their problems. He sobbed, tears and snot running down his face, that he tried to stop him. He begged me to believe him. He called Chloe worthless, telling me to take her, just to let him go. He promised to give me anything, to sign the divorce papers, the custody, anything. Chloe just stared at him, her face a mask of pure hatred. She called him a spineless bastard. I thanked Ethan, saying that was all I needed to hear. I clicked a small recorder in my hand. I called for Sal. The warehouse doors slid open, and the flashing blue and red lights of police cars flooded the room. 2 detectives walked in. One told Ethan Pierce he was under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and multiple counts of fraud. He told Chloe Vance she was under arrest for conspiracy and fraud. Ethan looked at me, his face a mask of disbelief, asking if this was all a setup. I told him to enjoy his 22 life, darling, and that I would be sure to send him a Christmas card. 4 days later, a seismic shock hit the financial world. The Costello Group officially announced its acquisition of Pierce Development. As the heir to the group, I held a press conference. I wore a Chanel suit and my mother's pearls. I announced a complete overhaul of the company, a new commitment to safety and ethics, and the establishment of a victims fund for the families affected by the Presidio Point project, and by the crimes of Richard Pierce and Jonathan Vance 25 years ago. A reporter asked what my thoughts were on my husband, who was being investigated for murder for hire. I looked directly into the camera. I said I trusted the law would deliver a just verdict, and that, personally, I felt a deep sense of regret over Mr. Pierce's actions. My only focus now was on healing and on making this company one my mother would have been proud of. After the press conference, Benjamin was waiting for me in the new boardroom. He said the final acquisition papers were ready, that all they needed was my signature. I glanced through them, then looked up. I asked him why he helped me, if it was just because of my father. He adjusted his glasses. He admitted that, at first, yes, he owed the Don his life. But then he stepped closer. He said he had come to admire the woman I had become. I let out a small laugh and signed the papers. I told him Pierce Development was in his hands now, and that I trusted he would turn it into a truly responsible company. He asked where I was going. I told him I was going to see an old friend. The visitation room at the detention center was cold and sterile. Ethan was in an orange jumpsuit, his face unshaven. The moment he saw me, he lunged at the glass, screaming that I was a devil. I calmly picked up the receiver. I informed him his charges were embezzlement, fraud, and murder for hire, and that he was looking at 20 years, minimum. I added that, by the way, Chloe had turned state's witness. She submitted evidence proving he conspired with her father to murder those protesters and me. And his father, Richard? He had a heart attack in his cell and was not expected to make it. Ethan collapsed into his chair, his soul leaving his body. I said one last thing. That Pierce Development was mine. Now, all the shares in his name and his father's inheritance had been liquidated to cover the funds he embezzled and pay damages to the victims. He was officially a broke designer. The sun was blindingly bright when I left the detention center. In just 6 months, I had gone from a victim locked in a basement to the heir of a multi-billion-dollar organization. I wondered if my mom was watching, if she knew the people who hurt her had all paid the price. 3 months after Ethan was sentenced, the company was renamed Costello International. I stood in the top-floor office, a glass of whiskey in my hand, looking out over New York City. Benjamin walked in, not in a suit, but in a casual sweater. He said gently that I had been staring out that window for an hour, that the board was gone and I could relax. I turned to him and said it was quiet. He said it was over, that I had won. I knew. He walked over, standing beside me. He told me my father had said something. 20 years ago, my mother had saved his father's life in a fire at a chemical plant, a fire set by Jonathan Vance. He took a small box from his pocket. Inside was an exquisite pearl brooch, a matching piece to my mother's necklace. He said she had left this behind. I took it, my eyes filling with tears. He said my old nickname, Sophia, and told me he knew this was sudden, but he said Heaven and Daki wanted to be with me, formally. He knelt. A year later, my father, his health surprisingly improved, walked me down the aisle. At the end of it, Benjamin was waiting. I had tied my mother's brooch to my bouquet. On our honeymoon, I whispered to him that I thought I was pregnant, and if it was a girl, I wanted to name her Lily, after my mother. He held me tight. He thanked me for breaking this endless cycle. In the distance, the dawn of a new day was breaking. My mother's pearls shone under the starlight like a final period at the end of a long sentence. And the beginning of a new one. Thank you all for listening to my story.